Welcome to the Dr. Lexi Show, where I take pregnancy topics and break them down into simple terms to help you advocate for yourself and your pregnancy. I'm Dr. Lexi, a board-certified OBGYN and maternal-fetal medicine specialist, which just means a high-risk pregnancy doctor. And today on the Dr. Lexi podcast, I have a very special guest. So we are going to be talking about things not technically pregnancy-related all day today for this episode, but it's super special for various reasons. The main one being that my guest today is my dad. So I want to introduce to everyone Judge Rick Hill. Say hello, please.
Hello.
Hello. So today's episode, we're going to talk some about pregnancy things, but you've never been pregnant, correct?
Correct.
And fun fact for anyone and everyone watching too or listening, you have never had kids.
Correct.
But I'm your favorite child.
That is true. That is true. Well, I don't know. I better be careful saying
You better be
that.
careful. So to give a little bit of a background for people listening, part of today's topic too, I think that we can talk about is what your job is and what you do. So I'm going to have you introduce yourself, but I'm also going to go through how you became or how you came to be my dad, since you weren't my biological dad, but you are my dad. So tell us first, please, what you do. Like, introduce yourself and tell the listeners and the watchers what you do.
Well, my name is Rick Hill. I'm actually a justice of the peace in Texas, in Brazos County, and justices of the peace are a long-going position in Texas. And I'm not an attorney, but to be a justice of the peace, basically you just have to have a pulse. You have to run for office and get elected. All right.
Okay.
And so, but we have a wide variety of things that we do. We do pretty much anything that no one else wants to do. And then when it comes to cases.
And this is in Texas. So this is in Texas.
Correct.
And you're in a county. It's a county judge.
Correct.
Is that right?
A county position.
Okay.
Mhm.
And tell the listeners what you do as a county judge.
We do small claims court. So if someone has a beef with somebody about a bill that's due or work that was done that wasn't done well, up to $20,000. That's our jurisdictional limit. So you can sue somebody for up to $20,000.
How low of a claim have you had in your court?
It's $150.
Oh, stop.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
And so it's really the people's court, justice court. It's not a court of record. We don't have court reporters. Most of our litigants are pro se, is what we call, which means they're not represented by an attorney, but it gives them an opportunity to come and have their say and have a judge determine one side or the other. There's all sorts of court levels in every state, all the way up to county courts of law, district courts, federal courts, Supreme Courts, Court of Criminal Appeals. And in Texas, over 90% of all the cases filed at any level are at our level. And so
90%?
90% of the cases, because you hear all the high profile cases,
right? But
there's not that many of them. So for the vast majority of Texans, the only experience they will ever have with the judicial system is at our level.
So also for people to understand a little bit of this, my dad was a high school chemistry teacher.
Correct.
That's how you started your career in like working in the workforce, right? You were a teacher. He was actually my high school chemistry teacher. And I think he was an excellent teacher. And I just started watching Breaking Bad, which makes me laugh because back in the day, people were like, oh, your dad's a chemistry teacher, like Walter White or Walt White or whatever his name is. And I'd never seen the show. So I'm like, now that I'm watching the show, that is not my dad. Other than the fact that you were a chemistry teacher.
Right.
So how did you get from chemistry teacher to then you were principal?
Correct.
And then you were retired for a hot second.
Yes.
And then you became a judge.
Right.
How did that transpire?
Well, after I retired, and actually the summer I retired was the summer that you graduated from your residency here in Phoenix.
That's right.
At Banner Good Sam.
That's right.
At your graduation get-together, one of your classmates was from Texas, and his dad was a JP in Orange, Texas, and we got talking, and I said, "Well, I've just recently retired," and he was like, "What are you going to do?" And I said, "I don't know what I'm going to do." yet. I was 53
I
at
think
that
you were going to be
time.
a librarian. You love books.
I
And
love
so
books. I
I
love
think that was
books,
part of your thing. You wanted to do that.
and I ended up doing a couple other things, being an adjunct professor at the university and that. But he said, he goes, why don't you think about being a JP in Texas? He said, because he was a retired high school principal like I
Okay.
was, and he said it's just like being a
The
principal.
principal. But for
What
a
you
lot
do
more people.
for a lot more people. And,
I love
with
it.
that.
Now, you mentioned
Yeah.
Orange, Texas. Is, you know the song China Grove?
Yes.
First question. Everyone should know, too, that, and this is partially why I wore this shirt, my dad and I love music. He has educated me on music throughout my entire life, and I thank him for that. It's helped me in so many ways. Who sings China Grove?
The Doobie Brothers.
The Doobie Brothers.
Yes.
Is it about China Grove, Texas?
It absolutely is.
Because China Grove is a city in Texas, right?
Correct.
And isn't it near Orange?
No, it's actually near San Antonio. It's
that's
around
right.
San Antonio, and
Okay.
And,
Okay.
uh,
I couldn't
well,
remember.
because the words are, there's a sleepy little town down around San
Down
Antonio.
around San Antonio. That's right. That's right. Because Orange is East Texas?
East Texas.
East
yes.
Texas. Okay.
Mhm.
Orange is a small town, too, for anyone who's listening to that. Okay.
Yeah.
So we have the Justice of the Peace stuff.
Mhm.
And before I get into our stuff, you also have this space, not only in music that I love, that you kind of instilled this passion for me, but also in sports, and particularly in baseball.
Correct.
So for anybody who doesn't know how to keep a scorecard, I learned how to keep a scorecard. How old was I? 9 or
Mhm.
10?
Yeah.
And I think that's really cool because a lot of people don't know how to do that. I also know any bit of terminology surrounding baseball, which is awesome because a lot of people don't know that. But you grew up in the world of baseball.
Correct.
And you also kind of do this really cool thing. So for anybody listening or watching who went to Texas A&M, he was the voice of Aggie baseball for 30 years. So if you went to an Aggie baseball game, you heard my dad. He also has been and still is one of the announcers at Texas A&M when people graduate.
Correct.
And you did my graduation from medical school too, I believe, right?
Not
No,
medical school.
Not medical
When
school.
you're undergraduate.
Undergrad.
Yeah.
How did you end up getting into radio stuff? Like announcing? Because I don't think people are young and they're like, I want to be a radio announcer. I want to be a PA announcer. Well, that's redundant because it's public address announcer.
Right.
The PA announcer.
Mhm.
How, because you were a chemistry teacher, you were in the military as well.
Yes.
Before becoming a teacher. So how did someone who is the chemistry teacher and has a history of being in the military end up doing announcing? You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
because when people ask me, what does your dad do? I'm like, how much time do you have? Because you do lots of, I don't want to say little things because they're not little, but you do a lot of things very well. Not just like you dabble, like when you do it, you do it. So how did you end up in that space of announcing? Because you have like a really, really cool voice. And your radio voice is a little bit different from your day-to-day voice.
Right.
So feel free to
And
answer.
I can tell you the story of how that came about.
I know.
Right.
I want to know a little bit of that. And I want the listeners to hear your voice, your radio voice a little bit too. Like your good evening and welcome to Olsen
Yes,
Field kind of thing.
yes.
It gives me chills when I hear it. Can you do
Yeah,
one?
most
real
people
quick?
don't recognize my face. They will say, you sound familiar to me in around town.
Uh-huh.
And that's how that comes about. So
I like
So I have an older brother that's
Mhm.
10 years older than me.
Mhm.
And when we lived in south of Houston in Lake Jackson, Freeport. My dad worked for Dow Chemical.
Mhm.
My brother went to Lamar University
Mhm.
and became a chemical engineer.
Mhm.
Well, he put himself through college and he loved radio, and he had jobs throughout, from probably age 16, 17
Mhm.
on up. And he worked at different radio stations. And
Locally, right? Like just local
Yeah, right,
radio,
right.
like
And then-
introducing the songs and like,
Mhm.
hey, like I guess announcing the goings on around town, like just
Right, right.
announcements. Okay.
And then at Lamar in Beaumont, he worked his way up till he was like had the prime spot in top 40 radio at a radio station called KAYC. And when I was 9 or 10 years old, so he's 19 and 20, my parents would put me on the bus. It's about a 3-hour bus ride. I'd get on the Greyhound or whatever bus was. And I'd go by myself on the bus, and I would go spend like a month with my brother in the summertime.
Mhm.
And of course, as a 9 or 10-year-old, and you have an older brother who's a radio disc jockey, and
That's gotta be
basically
the coolest.
spinning the records for a top 40 station.
Yeah.
Again, that's kind of where the music came about too, is because my music tastes are really kind of earlier. They started in the early '60s,
Yep.
kind of, and so that's why. And then I became, a teenager in the '70s, and so now I have the '60s music and the '70s music.
Favorite album, real quick. One of your favorite albums. Just list it real fast.
One of my favorite albums.
Yes.
Um,
Doesn't have to be the favorite, but one.
no, well, AC/DC, Highway to Hell.
There we go.
That's a whole different story.
Okay.
My first concert ever in my
yes.
life was
Oh, yes.
Aerosmith, and
Well, I have to say my
AC/DC was the opening act for Aerosmith.
for Aerosmith.
Yeah, and nobody knew who they were. And the first time I heard AC/DC, when they opened for Aerosmith, I'm like, holy crap.
That's a good band.
Yeah, these guys are
It's
good.
good. Yeah.
They might
Yeah.
be pretty good someday.
Yeah. Okay, so back to Lamarck. So
Yes.
you go on the bus,
Yeah,
and your brother was basically the person who was doing radio.
Correct.
In a way.
Yeah, he
and that
was.
kind of got you into it.
And so what happened was as a 9 or 10-year-old, I imitated him.
Yeah.
And so that was cool. So I would sit around the house and when after the summers and things like that,
Yeah.
and I did that for a couple of summers, and so I would basically imitate him.
Mm-hmm.
Then I graduate high school, go to the military, get out, go to A&M, Texas A&M, and then become a teacher
Mm-hmm.
in the fall of 1989
Mm-hmm.
at A&M Consolidated
It's
High
about
School.
to get fun because he meets me in about
That's right.
1990. So get
Yeah.
ready for the next exciting part.
That's right.
And you don't even know what's about to happen to
No,
you.
I don't.
You're going to meet a lady. She's got 2 kids, and you're going to get married, and you're like, shit, now it's all going down.
That's true.
Okay, so tell me what happened before you met me.
I was a teacher. I became a teacher at A&M Consolidated High School, and I wanted to be involved in the school, and I had never done any announcing of any kind.
Oh, not prior to that.
No, I had
I think I
never.
forgot about
I'd
that.
never. I'd imitated him when I was
Okay.
in 9 or 10 years old,
Yeah.
and never did anything else ever.
So then you're at A&M
And
Consolidated High School.
yes,
You're
I went
a
to some-
teacher, your first year teaching.
First year teacher. I went to some basketball games,
Mhm.
and no one was announcing. And so I went to the coaches. It was Mike Terrell and Sue Kennedy at the time.
Yeah.
And I said, hey, I've never done this, but if you want, I'll announce your games. And so that fall of '89, which was October, when basketball season started, I started announcing high school basketball. And I did that. That following spring, the
Mhm.
baseball coach comes to me, and he'd been to some basketball games, and said, hey, and that's when new Tigerland Stadium that was the first year of the new stadium, new baseball field and
Okay.
football stadium.
They
And
haven't rebuilt the baseball stadium since.
no,
have they?
it's
They need-
it's the same one.
Dear
yeah,
A&M Consolidated High School, please get a new baseball stadium.
yeah, they would love
It's
to hear
right in
that.
the sun. It's really hot.
Yeah. And so the baseball coach came to me and said, would you like to do baseball?
Mhm.
And I grew up a huge baseball fan, and you talked about baseball, but I grew up a huge St. Louis Cardinal fan and Houston Astros fan. And my grandfather was the one who taught me how to keep score,
Mhm.
which I then taught you how to keep score. And so that kind of started it all.
Mhm.
And I didn't do football for a couple of years, but I was still involved. And so I was involved in the school, and then Consol won the state championship in '91.
Yep.
And so that next year was the first year I did Consol football. And so for a while there, for 10, 15 years, I did pretty much all the sports at the high school.
At the high school.
And in the fall of '92,
Mhm.
so we're just a couple of years in there of that, they did an article in the paper. High school chemistry teacher announces Consol sports. Right?
See, this could be
And,
just a quick spinoff on this.
Yeah.
The whole thing about Breaking Bad, like high school chemistry teacher starts making meth. This is a better story. High school chemistry
Right.
teacher
Becomes announcer.
announcer. I think it's more lighthearted. It's more family friendly.
Right.
You're not going to disintegrate people in a bathtub and
Correct.
stuff like that. I'm just in a couple of episodes. Okay, so
Yes.
they put. The
But you know what? I
article-
loved Breaking Bad because people would say, "You were a high school chemistry teacher, right?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And they were like, "Could you have done that?" I'm like, "Yeah."
They give you a little street cred,
I have
right?
that knowledge.
Well, and you do it like I do have to say, when I was in your chemistry class, you taught us some of the coolest things, and you made it fun, right? Where you can make fun stuff, like if you put this on your hand and hold it above a flame, look, it doesn't burn you. And I was
Right,
like, oh,
right.
that's going to get people in
Yeah,
trouble.
yeah.
But yeah, you took
Lots
it.
of fire.
Lots of
I remember
fire.
I'm kind of a pyromaniac I always try to make it exciting
Yep.
with experiments and demonstrations
Yes.
and
Yes.
and fire's good.
Fire's good.
Yeah.
Fire's
So
fun.
it was fun. Yeah.
Okay, so the article goes in the local
Yeah,
paper.
and it said, "What would your dream job be?" And I said in the article
Oh.
that my dream job would be one day
Mm-hmm.
become the voice of Olsen Field, which is Texas Aggie baseball. And if you don't know, A&M baseball has a long history of being really, really good, and they had and so I didn't think anything of that. And then about 2 weeks later, Dave South, who is the voice
Mm-hmm.
of A&M Sports, he was the
Mm-hmm.
voice of on the radio for
Right.
football, basketball, baseball on the radio. And he calls me up out of the blue and says, "Hey,
That's crazy.
we're looking for somebody to do Aggie baseball in 1993. So this was the fall of 92. So next season. And is there anything that I could come listen to?" And so I said,
Who was the
"Well,
coach for Aggie baseball at that time?
Mark Johnson."
That's what I thought.
Yeah,
I still have
yeah.
a bobblehead of
Yes.
Mark Johnson.
Uh-huh. And about a couple of weeks later, Dave calls me and says, "Hey, I came to the stadium and sat in the parking lot, lowered the tailgate of my truck, sat on the back of on the tailgate of the truck, and listened to you announce." And he said, "I'd like to visit with you about possibly doing Aggie baseball,
Yeah.
Olsen Field." And so
That's how it started.
that's how it started.
And then 30 years later.
Yes,
Yeah,
and
okay.
and
I love
30
that.
years later, and so that and what people and I tell the story about the fact that when people hear me do my announcing voice, it's really me doing my brother.
So give us a little taste of like the intro at Olsen Field, because I have to say this too. Doing this and doing podcasts was totally new for me because obviously I'm a physician. And so this isn't something I've ever done before. So I always think about you when I do this because you've been in front of or behind rather a microphone in different fashions for over 30 years. And starting when you were in high school, doing basketball, turning the mic on, turning the mic off, doing those things.
Right.
So that was another thing we started to have in common. However, so I'll get to that in a second. Give me a nice little, because when I had to do this, it was like, learn your intro. And I'm
Right.
like, I'm never going to learn it. And then it becomes part of your brain.
Right.
So I feel like if I say, can you do your intro to Olsen Field? You can do it like that because it's probably seared in your brain. So
Yes.
Judge Rick Hill, can you give me a nice little intro for Texas Aggie baseball, please?
Good afternoon and welcome to Olsen Field and Texas Aggie baseball.
And everybody knows that. Like I
Correct.
know it now, right?
Yeah.
And I love it. And when they did change the name to Bluebell Park or Field or whatever, the other problem is that my dad loves ice cream.
Yes.
And they had a freezer that would have little ice creams in there all
Oh
the time,
yes.
which
Yeah.
were
Bluebell.
fantastic.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So when I mentioned something too about things we have in common, music, which you instilled in me, number
Mhm.
one, sports. I love that I know things about baseball and just sports in general was another thing. I would say another thing too would be maybe my love of different ice cream flavors. I'm lactose intolerant though, so it's not that great.
Yeah.
But whenever Bluebell makes a good nut ice cream or something that's without cow's milk, I'll enjoy that too. And then I would say this is something that we have in common too, of trying to like education for educating people, and then me trying to do it through some other form like this, which is kind of cool. The other thing, which is super, super fun, is, and this is where I'll kind of transition here, is that you recently had some AFib stuff, some heart stuff.
I did.
And what's really, really fun and interesting that gets me into this whole thing, and this is where I'm going to tie in a little bit about what I do with pregnancy and whatnot, and just in general, is that whenever that first started, I remember where I was. It was around New Year's time. And when I called a doctor to talk to them about you a little bit, they're like, oh, well, I have some heart things too. They're like, so this is your dad and it's kind of genetic. And so it makes sense that both of you guys have a little heart thing or whatever. Right. And I think I may have been crying already, but I was almost started crying because there are so many things that link you and I that seem genetic, that seem like, well, that's your dad. So, and you're not my biological father, but you adopted me when I was young. And it's like we have all these ties together, which is cool. So part of that, what I want people to kind of listen and learn to about this from today, I have a lot of patients that come to me that were adopted, whether from birth or they were adopted later. And I'm one of those people that was adopted later. So for those listening too, this is the fun thing. My middle name is Jill. My last name now is Hill. So I am Alexandria Jill Hill. And I used to think that was funny. And I was like, I don't want my middle name to rhyme with my last name. When I go to doctor's offices and they ask for a certain medical history, I mean, I know your medical history, but that's not what they're asking, right? They're
Right.
asking, like, can you provide your mom and your dad's medical history? So I have to kind of mark it blank. And it doesn't really affect me, I think, just because it doesn't affect me. But I want people to know if you're going in and you don't have that background history of a family member, a mom or a dad, or either of them, that's okay. We'll still work with what we have. We'll do tests on you to figure out your genetic risks based on who you are, your DNA and your blood tests, and that's
Right.
fine.
Yeah.
But I just think it's kind of cool. And to share the story, we do need to pull out my birth certificate because when you get adopted after you've been born and have a birth certificate, they can change, like legit change it.
Right.
So I have, but they don't put a new birth date on there. But
Correct.
I think it was around August, right? It was early
I think
August.
so.
Yeah. So I don't know. I think I need to have a second birthday. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I want 2 birthdays per year.
Your forever day, or I guess that's what they come.
Yeah.
They sometimes call that.
Oh, they do?
Yeah. There's your birthday,
Uh-huh.
and then when you're adopted, it's your forever day. Yeah.
And the other cool thing I think too is that when you started doing justice of the peace work, you actually do a lot of not truly, I don't want to say medical work, but your medical knowledge. I mean, you had some from chemistry, but it is skyrocketed.
Yes.
And so before we get into that, because that is huge on what I actually want to talk about today.
Right.
I know that you've never, so you've never been in a birthing room when someone's having a baby.
No.
Well, Misty, my sister's had 2 kids, so you've been around it.
Right.
But you've never gone through having a significant other, having a baby. And so you might not know the answer to these, but I have some questions for you that I ask all my guests.
Yes.
And then that's going to get us back to the justice of the peace and what you do.
All right.
And which I think is fascinating. So 10 questions. Are you ready?
So we're gonna actually see how well I've been at listening to the ones I've watched.
Oh, that's true too. Oh, that's true too.
If it's the same 10 questions,
Okay.
we'll see how I do.
Actually, a couple of them are different. I changed them up recently.
good.
Not
Great.
because of you. I just happened to change them up. Okay, question number 1. What does the abbreviation OBGYN mean?
Obstetrics and gynecology.
Correct. Question number 2. What do the letters MFM stand for?
Maternal-Fetal Medicine.
Oh my God, you're doing really good. Question number 3. How does a provider come up with your due date during a pregnancy?
I believe that it's a set of kind of measurements that you do about the size of the baby.
There's a measurement, and then it's the period, like someone's menstrual cycle.
Oh, that's right.
It's your
That's
first
right.
day of your last period, and then you do an ultrasound. Yeah, that's pretty good.
Okay.
Pretty good.
All right.
Question number 4. When is the delivery considered preterm? I changed this question.
When is it considered preterm?
Preterm. And you have nieces and stuff that have had kids, and they've had premature babies.
Right.
So when they say, "Oh, my baby was born premature," how many weeks along would it be for them to be called premature?
Preterm? Does it have to do with the due date?
Yeah, like how many weeks would they be when it's preterm?
34?
That is a preterm. Anything before 37.
Okay.
So So if someone's and that's
okay.
I just think that's important because when people move forward, they don't know if they term or preterm. So
But it's 37 weeks from what was calculated as the
due date, right?
Because
40 weeks and 0 days is your due date.
Right.
Yep. There's so many numbers involved in this, and
Yes.
I'm not good at math. So, question number 5: What is a normal fetal heart rate?
Like 120 to 150.
Yeah.
Is that
110 to 160. So you're
okay?
right
Okay.
within range. Question number 6: When should an anatomy ultrasound be done to look at all the parts of a fetus? You know that big important ultrasound where people are like, "Oh, they're going to tell me the gender and look at all the parts of the baby, make sure everything looks okay."
It'd be just a guess.
Yes, if a
20
pregnancy,
weeks.
yes,
Yeah.
it's 20 weeks. Gosh,
Yeah.
that's a good guess.
Yeah. Well, if you think about it, that's about halfway. So halfway, everything should be pretty much formed by then, right?
Yeah, we really talk about things up to that point. Things are forming, and then really from 20 weeks and beyond, they're growing.
Right.
Because they're either there or they're
Okay.
not, kind of thing.
Okay.
By 20 weeks, that's
Excellent.
That was a good educated guess.
Yeah.
Question number 7: How does an ultrasound estimate the weight of a fetus? This may be what you were talking about earlier.
Yeah. Measurements like head measurements, arms, legs.
Perfect.
Right.
Perfect. Question number 8: What makes up amniotic fluid?
Pee.
Yeah. You have been watching my videos.
Yeah. We get a fist bump for that.
That was great. Question number 9: Who should be offered Down syndrome screening in a pregnancy?
Everyone.
God, you're so good. I'm so happy. Question number 10. What is carrier screening?
Uh, well, I think that's the new question, isn't it?
It's a new question. That's a new question. Yes.
Oh, okay. So I would just, again, educated guess would
Sure.
be it would be looking for some sort of genetic markers that would possibly cause some sort of anomaly in the
Yeah.
pregnancy. Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
and the thing that the example I use, have you ever heard of cystic fibrosis?
Yes.
Okay.
Mhm.
You could be a carrier for cystic fibrosis. Mom could be a carrier for cystic fibrosis. I could be a carrier. Like anyone could be a carrier.
Right.
But if person A is a carrier and person B is not a carrier, their child will not have cystic fibrosis. If person A is a carrier and person B is a carrier, there would be approximately then, if they have the same type of thing that they have a mutation for, they would have a 25% chance of having a child with cystic fibrosis.
Okay.
And that's where you get people that are like, we had a child with cystic fibrosis and we didn't know that either of us could have a child with cystic fibrosis. Those are people who didn't have carrier screening.
Right.
Right? And that's what everybody is meant to have carrier screening for certain types of disorders. One of them is cystic fibrosis. One is spinal muscular atrophy. So I have been to, fundraisers and stuff with March of Dimes or different things. And they have people come and speak and they're like, they're talking about their child with cystic fibrosis. And as a maternal-fetal medicine specialist, my first question is, no one should ever have a surprise child with cystic fibrosis.
Right.
That means that your providers did not offer you cystic fibrosis carrier screening.
Right.
You see what I'm saying?
Sure.
And cystic fibrosis, the lifespan now is about 40 to 45. They're intellectually fantastic. There's nothing wrong with their intellect or their, ability to make decisions or work. They're great. The problem is their lungs won't last them a whole lifespan.
Right.
So it's a very, very intense disorder.
Right.
Anyway, if you are thinking of getting pregnant or are pregnant in the early part, make sure your doctor offers
Absolutely.
you carrier screening.
Right.
If you don't want to get it done, that's fine. Then you've declined it, but it should be offered to you, right? Okay, so the big thing that we wanted to talk about today, in all honesty, is that with my dad being a justice of the peace in the state of Texas, I will let him explain a little bit, but he is there's my understanding as a layperson is there's not a medical examiner available in counties in the state of Texas below a certain population. So a justice of the peace is having to go to scenes when people have passed away.
Right.
And so you can tell me a little bit about that, but what I really want to jump into is how this relates to me, because this is another link that you and I have, that I'm a physician, so a medical provider. You have jumped into this world of, I was a chemistry teacher and now I'm going to scenes where people have passed away. And some of these are neonatal deaths where it's an infant baby.
Yes.
That in like within months or days of age, and they have passed away. Right. And you and I, in general terms, I've unfortunately seen people die, been in the room when people have died, and you're arriving when they've just passed away, and maybe sometimes they're still having CPR performed when you show up. That's a traumatic experience, and it's hard to be able to talk to people. And I love that my dad and I kind of share this little space of vulnerability, and we have someone to talk to when it's a hard day or whatever. So share with us a bit about, like, how is a justice of the peace, an appointed person,
Elected.
Elected. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I said that wrong. An elected governmental person. How is it that you are in this space of making these medical decisions and being on the scene of a medical issue? Can you explain that? Because it still blows my mind, and it's fascinating to me, because I live in the state of Arizona right now. That's not a thing in Arizona to my knowledge. Correct. And I don't know how many states do this like Texas, but
there's quite a few still.
Tell us that. That is interesting.
So that's a part of this job that I was not really aware of, or because as we talked earlier about small claims, we do evictions, I do truancy, kids that won't go to school. I do all the truancy in Brazos County because that was my background, was an educator, and so I know how to ask the right questions. And so we do magistration, where if you get arrested, you get read your rights and set your bail.
For football games, that's a big thing, because Texas A&M is in College Station. When people have too much to drink and get arrested for doing something not
public intoxication
Yeah.
or disorderly
you see them the
conduct.
next day and have
I
to
do.
kinda okay.
Yeah, and
I
so
mean, the realm of what you do, the gamut,
it's
the array
pretty.
is huge.
Yeah, what I call us JPs are the landfill of cases and kinds of things that no one else wants to do in Texas.
Mhm.
And there's 254 counties in Texas. The coroner medical there are medical examiners offices,
Mhm.
but they're pretty much limited to Austin, San Antonio,
The
Houston,
big
Dallas,
cities.
Fort Worth. So for the vast majority of counties in Texas who do not, and it's probably, there's only, I think there's like 13 medical examiners offices.
In the
And
entire
so,
state of Texas?
yes, and so those
Oh.
counties. So we're talking to over 200 counties. That for a county that does not have a medical examiner's office, then the justice of the peace is the one who is the coroner/medical examiner who performs what's called an inquest. An inquest is an investigation into the death. Now when I order an autopsy, we send to one of the medical examiner's offices, and so we go to Travis County. All individuals who were ordered an autopsy
And Travis
go to
County is
Austin, and kind of tagging along with this is that all justices of the peace have training, and we have an initial 80 hours of training and then 20 hours of continuing education each year. And for 6 of my 8 years in office, or almost 9 now, I've been a faculty member on the Texas Justice Court Training Center. And so I travel around the state and I teach other judges, because for the vast majority of us, 96% of us are not even attorneys. So people are like, you don't know how many people have asked me, I didn't know you were an attorney. Well, in Texas, you don't have to be an attorney.
You can just be a chemistry teacher.
Yes, you can be
Not
a chemistry
just,
teacher.
but I mean, yeah.
And a lot of them have other jobs, and especially in the rural communities. And
sure.
So one of what I think is the most important jobs we do is when there's an unattended death, unattended or unnatural death. All right, then we go to the scene or to the ER. All right, because if you're CPR in progress and you're picked up at the home, CPR in progress, you go to the ER.
Yep.
And you are worked on for 20, 30 minutes or 40 minutes, and the doctor pronounces you dead. In other words, they never get you back. They do the epi, they do the, and so at that point, that ER doctor has been the primary care physician for that patient for 30 minutes, and the entire time they've been there, the primary care physician, they've been CPR in progress.
Right.
So who do they call? The retired school principal to come and do what's called an inquest. And at that inquest and again, it's an investigation into the death, and you consult with law enforcement, because a lot of times law enforcement are called, because law enforcement will respond with the EMTs, the EMS, and they'll show up at the hospital later. And then
it's fascinating to me that my dad is doing this as an announcer and a high school chemistry teacher. This is what he does for his job now.
Yeah, and
fascinating.
Yeah, and consult with medical personnel and family.
I want to see a list of all the justices of the peace. Is it justices of the peace or justice of the pieces?
It's justices of the peace.
That's what I thought.
Yeah.
Of all the justices of the peace in Texas, and know what their other side gig is or has.
Right.
I want to know that, because if 96%, you said 96%, are not attorneys, which I don't know what an attorney is really going to be much better at this.
They're everything.
I want to know, but I think it'll be so interesting. Like, this one's a football coach. This one works for UPS.
We've had those. We've had morticians, people who are morticians or who ranchers. And to be honest with you, in the state of Texas, a lot of the rural counties, the JPs are ranchers. And
this is
farmers.
like John Dutton. Like he could be a JP for sure.
Yeah. George Washington was a JP early in his career. People don't know that. I do a little PowerPoint for jury trials where I talk to people about JPs and what we do, and it's kind of a lesson. But again, because I'm an educator, and so because people are always like, I didn't know that JPs did that. And
also, you have been to Austin, to the state capitol, to do a lot of work just to support
legislative
work. So I just for people to know as well, he's also like wears that hat of driving to Austin and staying there for hours to give his professional opinion and to support
Yeah.
legislation in various things
And,
that I
I
don't even
did
know about.
that
But
as the president of our state organization.
right,
I've been president of our it's Justices of the Peace and Constables Association.
okay,
So JPs and constables work side by side.
okay,
I have a constable in my office, and we work side by side.
okay,
And so yeah, and if it's a traffic fatality, motorcycle fatality, suicides, homicides,
yeah,
anything like that, nursing homes, things like that. If there's and here's the key is that if there is a physician
hmm
who is willing and or able to certify the death, in other words, put down manner of death, cause of death, then
then you're not
an
called.
inquest is not, as long as it's a natural death. If it's an unnatural death, doctors cannot certify that death.
Okay, so then I want to swing back around to how this applies to what we're talking about and something within my field is that when you get a call on an infant that's in the home,
Yes.
I feel like you've gotten some of those calls and it sounds like there's a theme to that.
So what happens is a family wakes up in the morning or in the middle of the night
Mhm,
to feed an infant, and they find them unresponsive.
mhm,
911 is called. All right. Uh, Police show up, EMS show up. Sometimes they will transport. More often than not, they will not transport to a hospital because once EMS is there, more often than not, they figure out this baby's been dead for a while.
okay.
It's not like just happened.
So they don't always start CPR in the field
No,
if they
no.
okay. And we just went to a
And
CPR class the other day. That's why this
yeah,
is so pertinent as well.
yeah,
My parents both went. I went. A big group of people went to get all certified for basic life support and knowing how to do CPR. And part of that is infant CPR. And a big thing about that they talked about was a lot of infants that need CPR due to either drownings
mhm,
or a respiratory issue and oftentimes suffocation from a parent or a person in bed with that infant rolling over on them or putting a blanket on them accidentally while they're sleeping and not knowing it. So that's the respiratory part. And when we were all talking about this in general and our instructor, it's oftentimes from people being in bed with a tiny infant as
right.
opposed to having the infant in a crib.
And so for a death like that, when they're infant deaths, law enforcement is always involved. CID is always involved, which is the Criminal Investigation Division,
Mhm,
because we need to know what happened.
mhm,
And so and I can't remember what they call it, but they do a recreation. Sometimes they will actually
mhm.
in the course of the investigation and talking to the parents, they will do a recreation of kind of how it went.
Mhm.
What how did all this come about? And those children always get sent for an autopsy.
Yeah.
All right. The and so I order the autopsy. They go to Travis County for the autopsy,
Mhm.
and then at some point in the future, I will get a report from the pathologist and the forensic pathologist, and it'll say this is the manner of death, cause of death.
Sure.
All right, and and I will say that almost every single one of them, in my experience, what it always comes back is manner of death is accident, cause of death is suffocation, because they're almost always in bed with a family member or family members, um, and it's due to a variety of reasons.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things, and I'll put some information below with regard to articles that people can take a look at because there's data there, and like when people are in the hospital too, especially after you deliver a baby, and people might have some sedation or some pain medicine on board, they shouldn't ever be leaving a pregnant postpartum individual or even their significant other or relative in bed with an infant in the hospital after delivery unattended when there's possibility of them falling asleep or the baby falling asleep on the chest and not being able to breathe because the face is inside the chest area or a blanket or something. So whether you're at home, at the hospital, if you have a babysitter that you leave the baby with, I will include links and information below so that you can look into that so that you know where are some resources, what's the data behind it, so that you can educate yourself on making sure that your baby is safe particularly in those first few weeks and months of life. They're so tiny.
Yeah.
And they've got to be in a place where they're not going to have something in front of their face or occluding their airway where they could have the risk of suffocation.
I've had them fall down between two mattresses. In other words, the mattresses are together
Right.
in the course of the night. And it doesn't matter how much you say I'm a light sleeper and any movement will wake me up. And one of the most horrible ones I had was that they had, two. It was a bed that had two mattresses pushed together,
Yeah.
and the baby had during the course of the night had fallen between the two mattresses.
Yeah.
And of course it's
Yeah.
all it takes is the right position of. Now it may have
Absolutely.
happened. They may have done it before, and nothing happened.
Nothing happened. Right.
But for somebody, they call it positional asphyxiation, where it's just that's what happened.
Yeah.
And so I've had, I'll be honest, Lexi, I've done like 1,000 inquests in the almost 9 years I've been in office, and I may have had one infant who had been in the hospital. They were born,
Mhm.
and then like 2 days later, before they got released, died
In the hospital.
in the hospital. And of course, and that's a whole other thing is that I don't get called. Like if it's a fetal demise, they sometimes will call and inform me, but I don't come because I do inquests on someone who was living
Mhm.
who died. And
Right.
the OBGYN, the delivering doctor, is normally the one that signs the fetal death certificate.
Yeah.
For the fetal demise, and so I don't get called for those, or I don't come out for an inquest
Right.
on those, because again, the doctor that's been attending that person, and
Right.
they
But you would
know
think, though,
they
you
know.
said like the one that was 1 or 2 days old, you would think that if they're in a hospital, that should be a
Well,
neonatologist or someone that would.
but they call me for the inquest, and then what happens if they're living and they die, and
Even if they're in a hospital.
well, it depends. It depends on if and like sometimes I've been called for in ICUs, because someone has a fall and a brain bleed, and they are in the ICU for a week or two,
And
and then they die.
that
I
just,
get called because it's an unnatural death because it's a result of the fall.
yeah, but it's so weird, and I don't know how many other states are like that because that is so they're in a hospital, and you
Right.
think if I'm like I don't understand why that's
But that being
necessary.
said, if it's a natural death, and more often than not, and I, the big decision I have to make in an inquest is whether an autopsy is done or not.
And an
And
investigation. Do you
yeah,
talk to them about that too? Like,
well, if law enforcement's involved or not, and so
Yeah.
sometimes they are, and so for a lot of, and and again, I teach other judges this process, but there's only 2 instances when an autopsy is required by law.
Ooh.
And that's as if it's a child under 6 and abuse or neglect is suspected. The
Yeah.
second is if the district attorney asks you to, or it's a situation where maybe foul play is involved or possibly involved, and
that's
the,
the DA who's the
district
person who
attorney,
makes that
yes,
decision?
a prosecutor who, I've
Okay.
never had that happen to me.
Okay.
But the overriding philosophy I use is, given the circumstances, would I want an autopsy on my wife or my husband or my father or mother, my son or daughter? And so many individuals go to the ER, CPR in progress. I find out from the medical records, from the family, they've got 7 or 8 comorbidities. They've got, heart disease, kidney disease. They've had cancer. They've had, they've got hypertension, high blood pressure, diabetes. They're morbidly obese. And
So
they've
the
got a
fact that-
multitude of, and so I tell them, if I order an autopsy and people want to know what happened,
Right.
well, I've done this, when I order an autopsy, I am 99.9% sure when I get the autopsy report back, it's going to say manner of death natural, cause of death atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease, because that's what they find. Because that's what they find.
No, yeah.
They don't find diabetes. They don't find hypertension. They don't find high blood pressure. They find the result of all those comorbidities
Mhm.
that basically ultimately ended their life.
Right.
Acute heart failure,
Mhm.
acute cardiac failure as a result of,
Well, that might in your experience, does that bring people a little bit of solace of like, okay, I feel a little bit better now that I know that this was just a natural progress. I say
Well,
natural,
well
but a progression of an underlying disorder or disease that they had,
right.
meaning they had plaques in their vessels. And so
Mhm.
that's probably why this happened.
Well, and you mean by having an autopsy?
Yeah.
Some people I've been talked into them.
Mhm.
I'm never talked out of them. I have the conversation that I talk with,
Sure.
and I basically lay it all out for them and say, okay, given all this, and I'll ask them, do you want an autopsy?
Yeah.
And I tell them, I'm the one that decides that. However, I have the final say over everyone, which is kind of weird, isn't
It's
it?
very strange to me.
It's really
Very strange to
it's
me.
like, oh, okay. And there are justices of the peace in Texas who order probably more autopsies than they
Sure.
need to because they're not probably as comfortable and educated
Yeah.
as I am about it all.
But I think you're one of the best people to be in that situation to be a justice of the peace. I mean, and people that don't know you would be like, well, but you listed his resume. He has been a teacher in the military. He likes model airplanes. He knows music. He has a great radio voice. All these kinds of things. Why would that make him a good justice of the peace? It's maybe partially those things, but you have a good heart. And when you say if the family wants it, this and that, I talk to them. You do the things I think that maybe not other justices of the peace do. I don't know. But to me, that's what makes a good doctor. That's what makes a good teacher. And when you say I educate, you educate other justices of the peace. You educate your constituents. You educate the patients because you're dealing with patients,
Right.
even though you're
It's
not
a
in the
hard.
medical field.
I'm literally walking a family through a
Yes.
very, very difficult time, and
Yes.
I've cried. I've cried with
Yeah.
families, and so and to be honest with you, now that I've lived in that community for 40 years,
Mhm.
I'm coming up on 40 years after I got out of the Air Force and went to school at A&M.
You know him.
More often than not, there's a connection there already.
Sure.
And they know me, they know my family, they know they know it's so again, it's someone even if they don't know me, they may have heard of me
Mhm.
because they go to Aggie baseball games or
Yeah.
or something like that through the years. And so it's someone that kind of knows.
Yeah.
And again, like I said, I've been talked into a few, and everyone I've ever been talked into, it comes back exactly what I thought it was going to be.
Sure.
All right, I'm never talked out of them. All right, I've watched Donna and I watch all the the crime shows,
CSI shows.
and so I've never talked out of them. Because if I have a family
Mhm.
that is vehemently protesting an autopsy, I'm thinking, well,
Okay.
maybe okay,
Hey, okay,
no,
sure.
sorry,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I had that speech down too. I said,
Yeah.
that we don't really know, and we need to know, and
Yep.
this is basically it's an investigation,
Yeah, for sure.
and law enforcement is involved, and so I'm ordering an autopsy.
Well, and I
And
know
and
that you have been vital in things that are above and beyond what you're meant to do as a justice of the peace, because I mean, just the things that you do to help other people, it's fantastic, and I love it, and I'm proud because that's another thing that I think and hope I get from you is going the extra step, being empathetic. I think that's huge.
Yeah.
And I love that you do that. And the people that you've taught over those years, from the chemistry classroom to people within sports that you worked with and stuff, and then people within this justice of the peace world too, and then to your nephews and to
Mhm.
me and my sister. It's fascinating. And part of what I do with this is the concept of expanding knowledge, developing skills, and impacting lives. And the impact lives part is always the hardest part for me to explain, but I
Right.
know how it feels.
Yeah.
And this to me is like, I hope people see the impact you have had on so many people and also on me. And that's why I do kind of what I do here.
Can I tell a favorite story about kind of that sort of thing?
Yeah,
Or
sure.
do you-
But go
yeah.
quick because I have to pee soon.
Okay.
Do you have a small bladder? Because I have a small
Yeah,
bladder.
Well, it's just when I first took office, and being in a college community, we have college kids that commit suicide,
Mhm.
and so one of my early on deaths was, well, actually it wasn't a death it wasn't an initial death, but a 19-year-old college kid commits suicide, shoots himself in the head with a gun. He's on life support at the hospital. Law enforcement is there, of course, because there's a huge, and it's obviously going to be an unnatural death. Um, Law enforcement wants an autopsy, and when it comes to organ donation, they're very much against it because they're like, we don't want to mess up we don't want to mess up what's going on, so we want the autopsy, take them off life support. We want the autopsy and no chance for organ donation.
Mhm.
And I was the one that led that to say, well, wait a minute, why? Okay, he shot himself in the head. When I send him for an autopsy, manner of death is going to be suicide. Cause of death is going to be gunshot wound to the head. All right. Why do I care what happens to his hearts and lungs and things like that? And so it took some conversation between law enforcement, medical personnel, and the transplant people. I don't know if you know, what transplant people sometimes have a bad reputation of being really forceful and very,
Well, but and the
they're
family too. I mean,
yes.
I mean,
And in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, could we do something? Maybe something good could come out of this.
to give them the option. I mean, you're
Yeah,
not
give
going
them
and saying you need to do this, but you're saying
the
you opened
family
the
the family
Oh,
actually
I
wanted
see.
to
I
say
see.
the family wanted to donate, and law enforcement was pushing back
Oh,
against
I
me.
missed the part for the family. I was like,
No, he was
yeah,
an
yeah,
organ
yeah.
donor,
Okay.
and they wanted he
I
was an
see.
organ, he was a candidate
And they wanted
for
something good to or attempt
yes,
to give
yes.
something
And
from it.
so I facilitated
I see.
that. And what ended up happening was they prepped him for, and of course, and they don't, I don't know if you know this or not, but in organ donation now, they pretty much take them straight out of the person. Normally they take them out, they transport them to, like, from College Station to Austin or Houston or whatever. But now what they do is they prep the patient, and they actually transport the patient to Dallas, and they do they do at the actual organ recovery. That's another. It used to be organ harvesting, and it seems kind of like farming kind of. So
Yeah.
it's organ recovery now,
Covered.
and so they do it actually straight out of the person to other people. And I facilitated that. Didn't think of anything of it.
Yeah.
And literally a month later, I get a card in the mail from the Southwest Transplant Alliance saying, Judge Hill, thanks for facilitating that. His heart went to a 55-year-old male. His lungs went to this. We recovered tissue. And
I
so
just got
so
chills.
so and they listed all these 4 or 5 different people
Yeah.
that ended up he helped. And it was just from a conversation of
Right.
working through and getting people to understand. And guess what? When I got the autopsy report back, he died from a gunshot wound to the head,
Yeah.
and which was what happened. And
Yeah.
I've really, because JPs, again, we talked early on, they're not attorneys, they're not
Right.
they could be anybody in the community. And when
Yeah.
law enforcement's pressuring them, we don't want organ recovery, we want an autopsy, blah blah
Yeah.
blah. And the thing is and the law has changed to where we can do that
Right.
without, and say, if it's not going to affect how the manner of death, cause of
Yeah.
death is going to be determined,
Or an investigation
allow
that's
it to
occurring if
happen.
that's necessary.
Allow
Right.
it to happen.
Yeah. Well, so you basically are like, I mean, you're advocating for them
Yes.
and helping the family, whatever their wishes are, to be able to kind of translate it into the jargon
Yes.
appropriately for the world that they got thrown into pretty quickly, I'm sure,
Right.
with having to come to the
Yeah.
hospital and see their
Yeah.
child.
Now, what autopsies don't tell us, and I've had this where nursing homes, there's been something happen in a nursing home, and again, a lot of those times those individuals have comorbidities, and the family wants an autopsy. The problem with that is the autopsy doesn't tell us what happened in that room
Yeah.
when it comes to care or a fall or
No,
anything
yeah.
like that. What happened. Well, an autopsy doesn't tell us what happened. It tells us that they died from a brain bleed from a fall.
But you still don't know
But the
what
actual
surrounds the fall or the
circumstances,
actual incident. Yeah. Yeah.
And for the infants, sometimes, like the one I told you that died a few days afterwards, they that one ultimately came back undetermined. They never ever really found out, and even, and they do all the tests, they do all the
Yeah.
and they'll do genetic tests and this, that, and the other, and find for. And so what's the sad part of infant deaths is, even the ones I do autopsies on, they don't always find out
Yeah.
which I guess that probably goes into the category of the SIDS, maybe, or something, or
Yeah.
the ones,
Probably.
if it's undetermined and you can't figure it out.
Yeah.
You know,
It's
um,
it's It's insane. I do think it's very hard to go home with a newborn, especially when it's your first one, and to know what are the right things to do. And that's something that, as I mentioned, I'll put links below because I don't have kids. But if I did, I know that I would be the person reading all the little things to try to figure it out. But there are things that you can try to do to keep baby safe as best you can. And also while you're in the hospital, make sure that you're always in a place where the baby can be safe.
Right.
So, well, I would say this. Thank you for, number one, being here today. Number two, doing what you do for the community that you are serving and have been serving for so long. And number three, for being a great dad and for letting me choose and you choosing to be my dad. That's kind of cool too, because we actually had a choice about it.
Did.
You know, people are like, you can't choose your parents. I'm like, I did. And I did a really good job. Did you want to say something else? Sorry, I don't interrupt.
No. Well, your mom did.
Oh, yeah, that's true. Thank you, Mom. Thanks, Mom.
Yeah. Well, I'm very proud of you as well.
But
very, very
I will say, though, yes, you're correct. She got to make that initial choice. I, however, got to choose the adoption.
True.
Because I didn't have to go through with that part. I mean, not like it's a big, like, you have to do something. But I think there's something in for some people about, like, I have your name, which is kind of cool, you know? So I feel very proud when I write a paper and I see it published and like my last name is your last name.
As do I.
I know I think it's
pretty
really
cool.
Well, thank you so much. And I think today, again, my big thing, expanding knowledge, which I think we did today. Talked about a lot of stuff. Again, different topics today, not my typical all about pregnancy and things like that, but it's always something different, developing skills. Again, I will leave things below so you guys can look at some of the extra questions to ask, some papers, some links so that you can work on safety, whether you're in the hospital right after delivery or at home with the newborn. And then finally, impacting lives. Oh my gosh. Today, I think this is one of the biggest, for me, impactful podcasts that I've done because I've been really excited to have my dad here. And the whole thing about impact is having an effect on something or someone. And so this man has had a huge impact on me and a big positive effect on me and my life and my family's lives. So thank you again. And I'm going to cry. I'm Dr. Lexi, wishing you a happy and healthy pregnancy. Bye.